Okay, so this is a pretty general just topic of concussion. So we can get really in depth on a lot of different things involved with concussions, but this is basically just your general, how do you detect, what are the common signs, symptoms, and really how should a concussion be managed, because concussions are a really hot topic now, and there's a lot of controversy about how to treat them, and there's a lot of variation on how they are treated. So if you go to 5 different doctors, you might hear 5 different ways that this concussion should be treated, and the problem is most of them are not basing it on good levels of evidence or expert consensus. And so our goal at Access was to try to come up with a formal protocol so we were using the best possible evidence available to treat people consistently and safely for concussions. So some quick concussion facts. So they're very prevalent. So there's estimated to be 300,000 sports-related concussions in the United States every year. And nearly 15% of all high school injuries are concussions. So that number just went up. When I did this talk recently, it was 9%, and a newer study that came out of Boston Children's showed that the prevalence of it was actually higher, more like 15%. So that's pretty remarkable. If you think about how often people sprain their ankles, hurt their knee, all comers, all injuries in high school athletes, 15% concussions, that's a lot. That's pretty staggering. So the point is that early identification, proper management is very important to help try to assure that outcomes are as good as they can be. So what is a concussion? So what exactly is it? It's not always easy to explain, but basically concussion is a trauma-induced functional neurologic deficit. So what does that mean kind of in English? So it means that any forceful blow to the head or jarring of the head that results in rapid movement, it can lead to changes in the way that the brain functions. So this isn't a structural deficit. So it's not a deficit where if you took an MRI or a CAT scan you would see something. This is a functional deficit, so it's meaning that the neurons aren't working correctly. And the important thing to stress to people is that loss of consciousness is not required. So that was a very widely held belief that, oh, didn't lose consciousness, not a concussion. That couldn't be further from the truth. As a matter of fact, most concussions don't involve loss of consciousness. And the loss of consciousness, concussions used to be graded, and one of the ways that it was graded was loss of consciousness was used to grade concussions. And now it's been found that loss of consciousness as a symptom really has no long-term prognosis. So it's not really that useful in grading a concussion. So just important to know. So this, were you at this game?
No, I was there before.
Okay. So this is a good clip. I like to just show this clip because it demonstrates a lot of signs and symptoms that people can show when they have a concussion. So this is Celtics versus Heat basketball game in the playoffs. Magic, oh yes, thank you. Big Baby Davis is right here, and he's going to receive a vicious elbow to the head. So just kind of watch how he looks.
Once again,
he's right here.
Davis with the 4 fouls. Blocked from behind by Robinson. And Daniels picks it up. Great help defense from the littlest guy on the floor. And Davis is down. And now it's 4-on-5. Davis slow to get up. I think Davis is
slipping. Can't really get up.
Balance right now. He is shaking up big time.
Stumbling.
Bill Crawford trying to help out there. Boy, Davis. And it's a little disoriented.
That's the definition of dazed for sure.
They've already taken their 20s, so this has to be full. Davis can't stand up by himself right away. It took him a little time. See a doctor out there along with their trainers.
All right, so we saw a lot of kind of signs and symptoms of a concussion there. So common signs So a sign is something that you can see. So if you're the observer, this is what you're going to see. So they appear dazed or stunned. They can be confused about their assignment or their position. They forget plays. They're unsure of the game, the score, or the opponent. They can be quite clumsy. They can answer questions slowly. Loss of consciousness, but again, as we said, that's not required and oftentimes does not happen. They can show behavioral or personality changes. So these people can get very emotional for no reason. They can be irritated and irrational. Not being able to recall the events before or after a hit or fall, which is the amnesia, and vomiting. So those are all things that you need to be looking out for as far as an indicator that someone might have a concussion. So symptoms. So a symptom is something that the person reports to you. So this is how they're feeling. Okay? So common symptoms, headache or pressure in the head. So people don't always describe it as a headache. And a lot of times kids don't have constant headaches. They don't really know what a headache is. So you kind of have to ask it a different way because they don't always kind of have the same vocabulary that we have. So pressure in the head is often how it's described. Nausea. And I've learned not to ask them if they're nauseous because they don't know what that means a lot of times. So you say, are you sick to your stomach? Balance problems, dizziness, double or blurry vision, sensitivity to light or noise, that's very common. Feeling sluggish, hazy, foggy, or groggy. Concentration or memory problems, confusion, and we see this all the time, just don't feel right. So they have a hard time communicating exactly how they're feeling because they have a concussion, and they just don't feel right. And so those are all very common things that we see.
One quick question on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
One symptom, multiple. At what point do you really start suspecting?
So basically so concussion is a clinical diagnosis. So the only way that we diagnose it is does it look like a concussion and do they have multiple? So usually it should be multiple. Sometimes it can only be one. And that's when it becomes difficult to make the call, okay? I'll tell you the majority of the time there are multiple symptoms, okay? But if someone, for instance, and I think this might be the question you're getting to, someone had a pretty good hit or were suspicious and they have a new symptom on there that they didn't have before and they don't have another explanation for it, they should be assumed to have a concussion and they should be removed from play. Now that might be conservative, but that's the best thing to do, and the reason being is that might just be the first symptom they have and they haven't developed the rest of the symptoms. And symptoms can develop even a day later. So even having one symptom, you would have to still be suspicious of a concussion and they should be removed from play. But that is why it's good when you have a trained personnel when those dicey situations, because there's on-field evaluations where you're testing their balance, their coordination, you're doing memory tests, and when you add that into maybe just one symptom, but they don't remember who they're playing, they don't remember the score of the game, their balance is off, concussion. So it's not a definite, but I would say a new symptom with a head injury, you would assume it's a concussion. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And always err on the side of safety. So why is it important that we recognize these concussions and treat them properly? So adolescents, they have fragile brains compared to adults. And they typically have worse symptoms and their symptoms last longer than adults. We also worry about additive effects of concussions. So we know that the more and more concussions you have, the easier you can have the concussions and the worse the symptoms can be, and the symptoms can last longer and longer with each concussion. So we worry about additive effects.